Right now, I bet the smallest team working on a version of World of Warcraft are the ones getting the best results. We've had a few unofficial sources that have started estimating the number of players on Season of Discovery, and given how every realm is packed to the brim with several layers, I'd say it's pretty hard to argue with what they're showing. But as this newer version of Classic has begun to grow at an exponential rate, another one has started to dwindle somewhat. We all knew that day would arrive where the original trio from Vanilla to Wrath would have rerun their course, and as of today this has more or less happened, and I've no doubt this has had a big impact on the number of players in Season of Discovery. But we can touch on that a bit more later. What we can say for sure is that Season of Discovery is doing even better than probably anyone imagined it would be doing, and it's brought tons of people back into the oldest version of World of Warcraft, just with a twist on the traditional format. But what does the bigger picture look like? Today I want to take a look into that and see how well Classic WoW is doing at the moment. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Call of Dragons. Call of Dragons is an epic fantasy RTS game available cross-platform where you enter the world of Tamaris and are met with endless possibilities. Call of Dragons focuses on scale and wants every battle or journey to feel epic. The world features a near 4-kilometer square map with frozen tundras, mountainous peaks, deep ravines, and tons more. In Call of Dragons, you will of course be recruiting and commanding your forces, from the savage orcs, swift elves, to the resourceful humans. But best of all are the huge battles which take place. Here you'll find advantages through the world's 3D terrain, whether it's placing archers on the high ground, setting a trap in a ravine, or activating key items at an opportune time. Every advantage matters. Pair heroes strategically alongside powerful artifacts to create harmonious attacks, leaving your enemies stunned and ensuring victory for you and your army. And with so many different combinations to try out, there will be tons of new strategies to test on the battlefield. There are also social MMO type aspects to the game as well, which you'll be familiar with, such as collaborative large-scale projects to complete with others, as well as cross-play to ensure that there's always a party waiting for you. You can check out all this and tons more in Call of Dragons today. Download Call of Dragons to join fantasy battles now by clicking the first link in the description or pinned comment, or by scanning the QR code. Also, don't forget to use the promo code CODFANTASY. Many thanks to Call of Dragons for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. I want to start off by taking a look at some numbers on the seasonal server as we stand today. The website ironforge.pro is one I've used a bunch in the past, and whilst it's not perfect, I do think it gives us a good impression of how things are in-game. If you didn't know, it pulls its player numbers from Warcraft logs, so that means specifically characters who have been recorded in a raid at least one time, over whichever date range is applied. This does mean alts will be counted as separate characters, which is going to be a big deal for Season of Discovery. Again, it's not perfect, but this is what we have. As of the first reset, there was just under 375,000 active raiding characters, and as of the last recorded reset when I did this video, it had jumped all the way up to 464,000 characters who had raided at least once in the space of a week. Just to put it into perspective of how many characters that really is, the Burning Crusade peaked just after SSC and TK were released in mid-September, showing around 400,000 active characters, and Vanilla Classic's peak was just under 500,000 characters when Blackwing Lure came out, but that was a bit of a one-off reset, as you can see per the data here. As for Wrath of the Lich King, both Phase 1 content, including Naxxramas, the Eye of Eternity and Sartharian's Lair, as well as Ulduar, saw more players. But that's it. Other than that, this amount of players on the seasonal server is seriously impressive. Now, of course, a big thing that Season of Discovery has going for it is how incredibly alt-friendly the level 25 meta is. It takes very little time to get a fresh character from 1 to 25 and into BFD. That being said, Season of Discovery is only about a month and a half old, so despite this, I think the number of characters who are actively raiding at this point in time is very impressive. It kind of goes to show that fast and easy raids are what really get the numbers in for Classic, more so than difficulty and progression based raids. We'll get more onto that later though. What we can also see here is that for once, the realms are actually fairly well balanced too, which outside of a few niche cases has just never happened in World of Warcraft before. And as much as you hear people say they want WoW PvP, unless Blizzard hard enforces server caps, WoW always ends up how it looks in Wrath at the moment, with the vast majority of servers just having one faction on them. And even if your server hits 66% one faction, 33% the other, which is only 16% off it being 50-50 either way, in practice this means you're outnumbered 2-1 in the open world. But Blizzard's actions for Season of Discovery have us in a much better place, because they have essentially enforced faction caps. So if one faction gets too dominant, character creation is temporarily paused for them. Agren tweeted out not too long ago that all PvP realms have a 5% or less delta between the two factions, which for classic WoW PvP servers is an amazing feat to have achieved and maintained. And on the topic of World PvP and PvP servers, I'm thinking the Stranglethorn Vale PvP event, and just on PvP servers in general, is going to be absolute chaos. Hopefully in a good way. We also got another tweet that, thankfully, what's planned for STV will be different to what we currently have in Ashenvale. For me, Ashenvale is good reputation, it's good for earning rewards and all of that stuff, but it's missed the mark on being a PvP event because it's just kind of AV light. I know they were trying to base it off AV, but I was hoping it wouldn't be this bit, where we just run between one PvE objective and the next. Also, you probably saw, but the Phase 2 announcement tweet has a pretty big nudge towards a huge red sky. A blood red sky, you could say. Maybe a blood red sky for a blood god, like the one in Zul'Gurub, for example, Hakar. This PvP event might even involve free-for-all type PvP, or possibly the return of the corrupted blood incident to the open world of Azeroth once again. Imagine that. Either way, there's a lot to look forward to in Phase 2. But let's get back on topic here. You know, another thing that we can notice about the Season of Discovery realms? Their size. The biggest realm as per Ironforge.pro is Europe's Living Flame, which we like to call Locked Flame, because in Season of Discovery, if one realm gets too big, it also gets locked for new character creation to stop players piling onto a mega server. But unless you have a good reason to roll there are plenty of other options, because pretty much every single one of Season of Discovery's realms would have been considered mega realms back in 2019. Living Flame has some 80,000 active raiding characters with only a 2% margin between Horde and Alliance 2. I don't know if you remember Vanilla originally, talking about 2004 here. iServer populations back then would have been 2,000 to about 2,500, and I believe around 4,000 was what they were capable of hitting as a cap due to tech at the time. And it was an active decision they made to keep the numbers lower too, because they wanted a community of recognizable faces on your realm, not just a huge volume of players which are stacked everywhere non-stop. But hey, times change, I guess. And if we compare the biggest seasonal realm to the biggest Wrath realm, which is Gehenna CU with just over 19,000 players, there are 8 different Season of Discovery realms which currently have more raiding characters, some by an absolutely enormous margin. These increased server sizes really have been matched up to player demands too. We know Blizzard have constantly been iterating and changing how many players can fit onto a server whilst keeping it playable, and now these numbers really seem to prove that. I mean, if you go down on the Wrath section and scroll, there's a bunch of realms which would be considered pretty much dead by today's standards, and if you go even further down, there are many realms which Blizzard had to close and then merge their players elsewhere. People like the big realms nowadays, and with layering tech to keep things running smoothly, it seems to have been well received. There is another site I found too which has some interesting data called atlasforge.gg. This shows data according to Blizzard's API data from searched armory characters and guilds. It once again does estimates of its own for characters on each server, but will give more of an impression of overall players, including those that are inactive I believe, not just the ones that raid. And it does paint somewhat of a different picture. Here it shows the Realm Crusader strike on NA, with nearly 200,000 players. That's a lot of people trying to get on Asmolair. What I also like is it has a class race breakdown as well, with Human and Night Elf being the most popular on the Alliance, and Undead followed by Orc on the Horde. Kind of surprised there's more Undead than Orcs if I'm honest. As for classes, Hunters are narrowly the most popular. We'll have to see how many more nerfs it will take to change that. I think we're on nerf number 6 so far. The next most popular class is Warrior. Now there's a class that's totally fine. After that we have Druid and Mage, who are both pretty close in terms of numbers. Imagine Druid is one of the most popular picks in the game for Season of Discovery. That is a much improved class, because Druid was by far the least played class in 2019 Classic. And apart from the non-faction unique classes, Warlock is the least popular. It sure doesn't feel that way in game and you run into Warlocks all the time, but maybe that's just how big the servers are these days. But what I can say though, even though this isn't perfect data of course, is that it's much better class distribution than what we typically see in vanilla. Usually, without exaggerating, Warrior is about 25% or more of any individual server's player base, followed by Mage and then Rogue or Priest. And after that you just have the other classes. So overall, Season of Discovery is doing more than just pretty well, which not only bodes well for the rest of the season, but for Classic as a whole. Now Blizzard have really committed to this idea, and it's turned out to be incredibly popular. We really are getting one step closer to something bigger than just a seasonal server, but of course we're going to have plenty of time to talk about that over the duration of the season. As for why the numbers are so high, there are a bunch of good reasons. It's super accessible. You'll have people who could never grind out level 60 now seeing the level 25 cap, and since it's being raised in increments, I think people are going to find those leveling grinds a lot more manageable. There's just new stuff of course. People have imagined vanilla with changes for years. Now we really do have it, and it's been amazing. And perhaps one of the other biggest reasons is it'll just have a wider reach in terms of audience. Vanilla gameplay is typically very slow, especially at the lower levels. Runes have bridged that gap somewhat, and I think we're seeing more people that typically only play retail actually giving this version of the game a go and having a really good time with it. In fact, with a roadmap between Classic and Retail recently, Season of Discovery, among other things, might even be a game that's picking up players between major content releases. And Retail still is to this day a very popular game, probably more so than you'd think. It is harder to measure the player base on Retail because they have several raiding difficulties, people doing Mythic Plus as endgame instead of raids, and people who straight up don't do this content much and instead focus on collection and completionism type content, which Retail does a far better job of. But for example, the WoW YouTube channel ran a poll a little while back with some 120,000 votes, where Dragonflight just beat out Season of Discovery in terms of popularity. Classic as an entire franchise did technically have more votes, but I think there are a lot of quiet, casual players on Retail who don't really get involved into things such as how well is my game doing, and they just, well, play the game. Classic era has also remained pretty consistent, and there are still a good amount of players going back to that version, and I'm thankful that it still exists so people who prefer a more no changes approach have somewhere to go. But amidst all the success, one version of World of Warcraft has started to see quite a notable drop-off: Wrath Classic. This has been a bit of a trend so far. Hard raid comes out, number of active raiders drops off. You can see Ulduar looking like a staircase going down week on week, despite it being one of the most hyped up raid tiers of all time. And ICC isn't a walk in the park either, or at least the last few bosses aren't nowadays. We also got our ICC patch with no buffs inside the raid, and Lich King on 25 Heroic week 1, possibly even week 2, was the kind of boss you'd find midway through a mythic raid. It was a 15-minute boss encounter where if anything went a little bit wrong you could easily wipe, whilst the whole raid would also have to perform at an extremely high individual level. But then guilds would already get stuck long before this encounter, as both Syndragosa and Professor Putricide on Heroic are also quite a challenge when you first get to them. And the drop-off for ICC started before Season of Discovery and before the buff was brought into the game too. Season of Discovery was November 30th and the 5% buff started on December 5th. And this 5% buff, just in case you don't know, it basically makes you 5% more effective at everything, and it increases by a further 5% every 2 weeks, and it will eventually cap out at 30%. Still, in a 5-week period, Wrath of the Lich King dropped from 400,000 active raiders all the way down to 200,000. It has, however, seen an increase following the last reset when the 15% buff went active. It's been a drop-off for Wrath of the Lich King, but not a wholly unexpected one, and several things would have caused this. First up is, the raid is hard. Lich King especially, as mentioned, is far and away the most difficult encounter we've seen on Classic. On top of being hard, ICC is also a very long raid, which will be taking many groups 2 nights or more to get through. The holidays usually have a knock-on effect to the amount of people raiding as well, but Season of Discovery was out during the holiday period too, and its numbers have only gone up, it seems. And of course, it's the final raid of the expansion. There is always some reduction in the player base once they've completed the last tier, but we can see neither Naxxramas nor the Sunwell saw a drop this fast. There is also no Wrath era confirmed to be happening at the moment. Our characters will progress on to Cataclysm, and possibly even future expansions. This would have demotivated some people to carry on playing and to earn their bis. And well, we've seen the roadmap, right? The Cataclysm beta isn't planned till late spring, with an early summer release for the expansion. Do you want to be doing ICC every week for that long? Maybe not. Don't worry though, Ruby Sanctum is out now, the real final tier of Wrath. Surely that will change things around, right? And you know what? It's no coincidence that Season of Discovery came out of nowhere as fast as it did. There was always going to be a drop-off at the end of Wrath, and the seasonal server would have piqued so many players' interests who otherwise would have probably just quit, to be honest. And if there was ever a time to properly explore how Classic with changes were to look, surely it's at the point when Kata comes along and changes everything forever. I'm expecting a smaller player base for Kata too compared to Wrath, and for what it's worth, I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as you often hear it being made out to be. But by Kata, it's definitely taking a shift towards progression raiding for the PvE endgame, and I've seen enough examples to know that caters to less players compared to the simplicity and ease of classic raids. But luckily for us, we won't have to choose, because you can play one or the other, or you can even play both. That's pretty cool, right? Either way, the population for Classic as a whole is looking pretty amazing at the moment, and it's probably one of the best and most accessible times we've ever seen to get into some vanilla WoW. As mentioned earlier, these numbers we looked at today aren't perfect, they're not going to be the full representation of the story, but they do give us a good impression of what's going on. And I think things are looking very promising for the future of Classic WoW. So let me know how your realms are looking at the moment, whether you've been focusing more on seasonal, Wrath era, or anything in between in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.